Joined by Shanila Mohammed from Amnesty International. Shanila, sadly, I never talk to you when it's a happy occasion, and it just seems that there seems to be growing increase of human rights abuses under the veil of COVID-19. Tell us more about what you're seeing.
Morning, Jane, and absolutely. I mean, COVID-19 has exposed, the inequalities, the failing justice systems, failing education systems, and it's really exacerbated the situation, particularly for the poor and marginalised. So what we saw in 2020 was, that the world was not in a good place, and it still continues to be that way. And, under COVID, we saw governments and states using COVID to further clamp down on human rights. And we saw people further being deprived of basic services of justice, and inequalities, Jane, have just grown exponentially during this time. So the world is not in a good place.
So you talk about the COVID being weaponized by leaders. I suppose it's easier just to round people up and get the dirty work done under the pretense that you're looking after people's health.
Absolutely, and we saw that happening in South Africa. I mean, first of all, we saw the army being deployed, for public order policing. They are not being trained. They have not been trained on this. And so we saw people like Collins Khoza losing their lives. We saw, people being in Sub-Saharan Africa, where there's conflict, in Ethiopia, in Nigeria. We saw, political party, sort of opposition party people being arrested. We saw refugees suffering. I mean, it was horrendous to see that refugees running away from conflict situations were being turned away by countries that they ran towards under the excuse that, COVID is here, we can't allow people in. And so, what we saw was the poor and the marginalized. Not only were they badly affected by COVID in itself, but their rights were just further deteriorated. And governments took advantage. And it wasn't just in Africa, Jane. We've seen this around the world, that, the weaponization of COVID-19, the nationalistic response to the disease, the blame game. Even now you'll see in England, they refer to the South African, they talk about South African variant, they talk about Brazilian variant. And I understand that, it's a way of describing it, but what it does is it increases xenophobia. It increases, people's, because people have a limited understanding of what this is all about. And so, the whole confusion was further exacerbated by poor leadership. And in fact, what we saw was that people, average people, human rights workers, doctors, nurses, they were the heroes of the day. Certainly not any leaders or any state. No. They fail their people continuously.
And look what's happening in the US now, the targeted attacks on Asian people there. I mean, that certainly was not helped by Donald Trump and some of the rhetoric that came out of that mouth. But I was really disturbed to hear about what was happening in Uganda. I mean, it's the largest human rights, they have the largest refugee camp in Africa, and they closed for business.
Absolutely. And, these refugees have nowhere to go. I mean, they are running away from genuine conflict. And then, they get turned away and COVID is used as an excuse. And, many people will die during that, during that time, not just due to conflict, but also due to, nature, the fact that there's no food, they have no support, etc. And, again, we saw it even in the way, the whole xenophobia towards refugees, migrants and asylum seekers plays itself out even when we're talking about vaccines. I mean, South Africa, when they first introduced their plan, they did not refer everyone who was going to get a vaccine needed to have an ID. We know from our reports done, our analysis done in South Africa, that the asylum system here is broken, that people struggle to get papers, they struggle to get recognized as asylum seekers. So, that meant that they would be literally left behind. And until everyone is given the treatment and the vaccines, no one is safe. And, it took Cyril Ramaphosa to eventually try to correct that in a statement. But the fact that that thinking was there is worrying. It just shows how, COVID has made people's and governments even more selfish than they were before, because it's become about us, nationalism, let's protect ourselves, forget about the rest of the world.
Thanks, Shanetta Mohammed. Sadly, it's easy to kick people when they're done, isn't it?